Hello everyone, this is Dr. Hatami. In this short video, we're going to talk about the classification and bones and specifically anatomy of a long bone. So bones come in different shapes and sizes depending on their functions. If they are supporting our weights, if they're more allowing the movement, if they are for protection. So based on their shape, we are going to divide them to these 5 categories. So we have irregular bones, short bones, flat bones, long bones, and sesamoid bones. So irregular bones, like the bones which we cannot actually define any shape for these bones. These are complex bones. So the bones of our vertebrae is like irregular bones, and some of the bones in our skull, these are irregular bones. What are the short bones? So actually short bones are cube shaped. So like the bones we have in our wrist, the bones we have in our ankle, these are short bones. So basically these are cube shaped bones. And then we have flat bones, which flat bones are the bones, they are thin and also like mostly curved and also flat. Like the bones we have in our skull, the bones we have in our sternum, ribs, these are flat bones. What about the long bones? Pretty easy and straightforward. They are longer than their width. So then they're basically gonna be for supporting and weight and allowing movement. So most of the bones gonna be found in our upper limb, in our lower limb. These are long bones, like the bones of our arm, the bones of our thigh, even the bones of our hand or fingers. These are long bones. But what about sesamoid bone? So sesamoid bone is the bone which they are small, they are round, and they would be found within the tendon. Do you remember the tendon? Tendon is a connective tissue connecting muscle to the bone. So these round and small bones would be found within the bones, and the most important sesamoid bones in our body is called patella bone or kneecap bone. So patella bone is the sesamoid bone. Okay, so in this part, we are going actually to talk about the anatomy of a long bone, like the bone that you have in your arm, the bone that you have in your fingers, the bone that you have in your thigh. So as you can see, is it like a long bone, as the name is descriptive? Then for a long bone, we are going to define 2 ending parts, 1 and 2, which then each is called epiphysis. So the epiphysis would be the ending of the long bone, which we have 2 of them. Okay, and then the shaft of a bone is called diaphysis. So we are going to have a shaft, diaphysis, and 2 ending as the epiphysis, right? And then there is a region which would be found between the epiphysis and diaphysis. It's called metaphysis. So just here, just between epiphysis and diaphysis, this region is called metaphysis. So we have epiphysis, diaphysis, and this region is called metaphysis. So we have epiphysis, metaphysis, and diaphysis. Okay. So what else? Inside of the shaft of the long bone, there is a cavity, which this cavity is called medullary cavity. Why medullary cavity is important? Because inside of the medullary cavity, we have bone marrow. So before puberty, this bone marrow is a red bone marrow, producing the blood cells, but after puberty it would be filled with yellow bone marrow. The bone marrow is going to store the fat tissue. Okay, what else? And then we are going to describe these two structure which they are connective tissue covering the inside and outside of the bone. So peri means around and osteo means bone. So periosteum is the connective tissue covering bone from outside. That is called periosteum that you can see the picture here. And then endosteum would be again the connective tissue lining the inside of our bone and is called endosteum. Okay, so let's review. We talked about the diaphysis and we said diaphysis is a shaft of the bone. And because it's going to be found at outer side of the long bone, that is a compact bone. And then we talked about the medullary cavity, which inside the diaphysis we have medullary cavity. And then inside of the medullary cavity we have yellow bone marrow, which is going to store the fat. And we talked about the epiphysis, which is the ending part of a long bone or expanded end of a long bone. Actually, it's composed of the spongy bone. So again, if you draw a long bone, this epiphysis, we're going to have this spongy bone. So spongy bone would be found here, and then at the diaphysis, the outer layer here, we are going to have our compact bone. So here we have our compact bone, and then inside we are going to have our medullary cavity. So here it's the medullary cavity, which the yellow bone marrow would be found here. Okay, and then we talk about the metaphysis, which is a region between the epiphysis and diaphysis. But pay attention, the metaphysis is important. Why? Because at this region we have this amazing structure is called epiphyseal plate. So the epiphyseal plate known as growth plate. That is the structure it's giving you your height. So as long as you have the epiphyseal plate or your growth plate, you can grow in your height. You can get taller. But whenever the epiphyseal plate is not there or it becomes bony, then you're not growing in your height. So then one more time, epiphyseal plate, it's a region which it's made up of cartilage. What type of cartilage? It's made up of hyaline cartilage, which allows you for bone growth. It in the grows in the length, or we call this as longitudinal growth, which it means grows in the length of the bone. That's because of the epiphyseal plate. So then at a certain age, epiphyseal plate can get bony. So then instead of having epiphyseal plate, we are going to have the epiphyseal line. What is the difference between the epiphyseal plate and epiphyseal line? Epiphyseal plate is a cartilage, is a hyaline cartilage, and epiphyseal line is just a bone. So for girls at the age of 18, epiphyseal plate become bony, become epiphyseal line, and for boys at the age of 21, epiphyseal plates become epiphyseal line. So if your age is above 18, if you're a girl or boy as above 21, there is no hope that you can grow in your length. Okay, so that's all because your growth plate, your epiphyseal plate becomes bony, and then they cannot grow in their length anymore. Okay, that was regarding the metaphysis. And then we talked about these two structure which they are kind of covering and protecting our bone. Periosteum, connective tissue covering the outside of the bone, and endosteum is again the connective tissue lining the inner surface of the bone. And then do not forget to practice draw a long bone and label the major part of the long bone, like diaphysis, epiphysis, metaphysis, medullary cavity, draw periosteum and endosteum, and also do not forget the epiphyseal plate or epiphyseal line. Thank you for your attention.